Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010, Summer Session 2019. Here's our book, Introduction to World Philosophy, a Multicultural Reader. In this video, we're going over St. Augustine's writings, and this is for Exam 2. And we'll be going over Exam 2 questions from Part A, Question 3 and 4, and Part B, question number 6. So the questions for Part A are, what are Augustine's responses to the skeptics in answer to skeptics? And how is Augustine's City of God similar to Descartes' argument for the existence of a self in chapter 10 of our book? And then the Part B question is, in City of God, how does Augustine say we recognize the image of God, the supreme Trinity, in ourselves? So we'll begin with question number 3 from Part A. What are Augustine's responses to the skeptics in answer to skeptics? That's the title of the piece that we're reading. It's chapter 10, Answer to Skeptics. So in the previous video, I went over Sextus and Philo, the skeptics who say we should suspend our judgment about what knowledge is, or can we have knowledge. So this is, Exam 2 is going over Part 3 of our book, Epistemology, the study of knowledge, and whether or not you can acquire knowledge and how you can acquire it if you can. So the skeptics say we cannot ever be certain if we've acquired a knowledge. Maybe in the future we can, but right now, for various reasons, it's wiser to suspend judgment about knowledge, not to be a dogmatist who says, I know there is absolute knowledge to be had, and not to be like the academic skeptics who say, we know that you cannot have knowledge. The only thing you can know is that you cannot have any other form of knowledge. And the skeptics who say, suspend judgment and have a peaceful mind and wait to see. Maybe knowledge will appear in the future, but as of right now, everyone has their own relative opinions. Who has this ultimate standard by which to judge the truth? It seems impossible. So they suspend judgment because they say we can't even be certain that it is impossible to know the truth, like the academic skeptics were saying. And it's kind of peculiar because Plato started the academy, and in his middle period dialogues, he created the theory of the absolute ideas, these absolute forms of knowledge. That's how we acquire knowledge. We turn the eye of the soul inward towards these absolute ideas that are imprinted on the soul. And these absolute ideas, this is the philosophy Augustine adopts. He adopts Plato's original academic philosophy. And also I'll get more into the theory of absolute ideas, which we've gone over before. But historically, the people who took over the academy after Plato adopted the theory that we cannot have absolute knowledge, that Plato's theory of forms doesn't explain what the forms really are and how we could ever have knowledge of them. So then they adopted this kind of a dogmatic skepticism. We know for sure that you cannot acquire absolute knowledge, except for that one thing. You can know that you cannot know anything else, other than the fact that you cannot acquire absolute certain knowledge of anything. So it is to those academics, the skeptics, and in particular Carneades, that Augustine's responding to. So how does he respond to the skeptics in answer to skeptics? His main tactic is saying, okay, you're saying I can't be certain about whether the world, for example, is one or many, and whether an act is good or bad. But what he does say is you can be certain of the alternatives from which to choose. That you might not know which alternative is true, but you can be certain that the case is either one way or the other. So I'll read a little bit from here on 364. He says, and he's responding to the skeptic Carneades, the academic skeptic, you say that in philosophy nothing can be understood, and in order to spread your utterance far and wide, you ridicule the quarrels and dissensions of philosophers. And you think that those quarrels and dissensions supply you with arms against the philosophers themselves. How, for instance, are we to adjudicate the contest between Democritus and the earlier cosmologists as to the oneness or incalculable multiplicity of the world, inasmuch as it was impossible to preserve agreement between Democritus himself and his heir Epicurus? So Democritus said the world's made of these little atoms that randomly combine in an infinite void. That's where all the order in the universe comes from these unthinking, soulless little atoms. Whereas other cosmologists said the whole world is one undifferentiated, eternal entity. So there's all these different theories, and the skeptics are saying, look, the most intelligent people that you have in your societies disagree and have diametrically opposed opinions about the most important things. So who's to judge? Who's to judge? Knowledge is therefore impossible. So this is what Augustine says. Nevertheless, I know something about these matters of cosmology, for I am certain that either there is only one world or there are more worlds than one. I am likewise certain that if there are more worlds than one, their number is either finite or infinite. Carneades would teach that this notion resembles a false one. Furthermore, I know for certain that this world of ours has its present arrangement either from the nature of bodies or from a foresight of some kind. So there's his point. We might not know if the world is one or many, but we know for certain that it's either one or it's many. And if it is many, it could be a finite number or infinite. Those are the only possible alternatives from which to choose, and we can be certain of that. So certain knowledge is possible. Certain knowledge about the alternatives, the logical possibilities, that's what he's saying. We can be certain about that, even if he grants we can't be certain which of these answers is necessarily true. So then what about the fact that the argument from the skeptics that we can never have absolute knowledge because different cultures have totally different ideas about what is just. Our own senses deceive us. We think, maybe if there's a fire on a mountain, but really it's a dust cloud. So how does Augustine respond to that? And he's saying, okay, maybe I can't be sure or trust the testimony of the senses, but I can be certain that it seems like whatever it seems like to me. I can be certain of my own subjective opinion. Whether that correlates to objective reality, okay, Augustine grants. You can't be certain about that, but you can be certain that you think that there is a fire on the mountain, and that's a truth. I do think that. Whether or not there is a fire on the mountain, I am certain that it appears to me that whatever the case may be. So you can be certain of your own subjective opinions about things. If you look at page 366, the bottom of the left-hand column, it says, restrict your assent to the mere fact of your being convinced that it appears thus to you. Then there is no deception, for I do not see how even an academic can refute a man who says, I know that this appears white to me. I know that I am delighted by what I am hearing. I know that this smells pleasant to me. So those are the ways Augustine responds to the skeptics. The first way, I might not be certain about any cosmological fact, but I can be certain of the possible alternatives of what they are. So there is some realm of certain knowledge, even regarding cosmology. And regarding the idea of subjective relativity, your senses deceive you, fine. So I can't gain absolute knowledge through my senses, but I can at least be logically certain that I think I am experiencing something. And he also says you can be certain of things like mathematics. On the right-hand column on page 365, he says, even if the whole human race were fast asleep, it would still be necessarily true that 3 times 3 are 9, and that this is the square of intelligible numbers. So those are some of the ways that Augustine responds to the skeptics. Now the next question, from part A, question number 4. How is Augustine's City of God similar to Descartes' argument for the existence of a self in chapter 10 of our book? So Descartes' argument, he was looking for one indubitable truth. Is there anything thing that I can know for certain without any doubt, and he comes to the conclusion there's only one thing, and that is that I can be certain that I exist. Why? Because I'm thinking. If I'm thinking, I exist. Even if my thoughts are illusory and I am being deceived by some omnipotent evil genius who makes me hallucinate, nevertheless, I know I exist if I'm being deceived, because in order to be deceived, I have to be a thinking being. So that's what he says in chapter 10 of our book, and that is the same argument that Augustine uses in City of God. So let me just read this, page 366. And he says, chapter 26, of the image of the Supreme Trinity, which we find in some sort in human nature, even in its present state. So, and indeed we recognize in ourselves the image of God, that is, of the Supreme Trinity, an image which, though it be not equal to God, or rather, though it be very far removed from him, being neither co-eternal nor, to say all in a word, consubstantial with him, is yet nearer to him in nature than any other of his works, and is destined to be yet restored, that it may bear a still closer resemblance. So this is the image of God that is not equal with God, but close, of all created things, is almost equal to him. After I go through the City of God, I'm going to read a selection from Augustine's Confessions, where he talks about the outermost horizon of the cosmos as the city of God. And that is where he learned from Plato the absolute ideas exist. And for Augustine, the absolute ideas are the ideas in God's mind. When God created the universe, the ideas, the blueprint he was using in his mind are accessible to the human mind as well. That the light of God's mind can be reflected in the human mind. And so it makes more sense when you put it in this Platonic cosmology of this outermost sphere of the universe containing all of space and time and radiating it inward to create the universe. So that's from the ideas of God's mind, the universe is created. All right, but I'm going to get into the details of this idea of the Trinity, how our own logical mind can prove three things. So the Trinity is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And the three forms of knowledge that we can be certain about are that I exist, that I know that I exist, and that I love the fact that I exist and that I know that I exist. And that, so it would seem, if you're going to match it up, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, to the Father as I am, I exist. That's the first thing we can be certain of. The second was, I know I exist. So that's like the Son, logos, an explanation, knowledge. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the logos. We saw in the video about Theaetetus, Plato had Socrates arguing about what is knowledge. It's a right opinion with a logos, with an explanation. So the fact I know that I exist correlates to the logos, or God the Son, and then loving the fact that I am and that I know that I am would therefore correlate to the Holy Spirit. So here is his argument, and just keep in mind this is the same logical progression that Descartes used to come to his one indubitable truth, that I know I exist, even if I'm being deceived, because in order to be deceived, I must exist as a thinking thing. All right, so here it is, this image of God, which is yet to be restored. For we both are, and know that we are, and delight in our being and our knowledge of it. Moreover, in these three things, no true seeming illusion disturbs us, for we do not come into contact with these by some bodily sense, as we perceive things outside us, colors, for example, and sounds, but without any delusive representations of images or phantasms. I am most certain that I am, and that I know and delight in this. In respect of these truths, I am not at all afraid of the arguments of the academicians who say, what if you are deceived? For if I am deceived, I am. For he who is not cannot be deceived. And if I am deceived, by the same token, I am. And since I am, if I am deceived, how am I deceived in believing that I am? All right, so that that was the same argument that we saw Descartes use on page 266 and 267. So on the left-hand column of page 266, Descartes says, not at all. Of a surety, I myself did exist since I persuaded myself of something, or merely because I thought of something. But there is some deceiver or other, very powerful and very cunning, whoever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me, then without doubt I exist. Also, if he deceives me, and let him deceive me as much as he will, he can never cause me to be nothing so long as I think that I am something. So that's the same argument, and that would cover question number 4 for part A in exam 2. How is Augustine's City of God similar to Descartes' argument for the existence of a self in chapter 10 of our book? But I will continue here because question number, this is for part B, number 6. In City of God, how does Augustine say we recognize the image of God, the Supreme Trinity, in ourselves? So that gets back to this idea of the absolute ideas. So let me continue here about the 3 things that we can know for certain that restore the image of God in us. The image of the Trinity is restored by knowing for certain that I exist, even if I'm being deceived. So then he continues here on the left-hand column of page 367, and consequently, neither am I deceived in knowing that I know. For as I know that I am, so I know this also, that I know. And when I love these 2 things, I add to them a certain third thing, namely my love, which is of equal moment. So, I know I exist. First of all, you can be certain you exist, even if you're being deceived, because to be deceived is to exist. Then you know that you exist, and then you love the fact that you exist and that you know that you exist. How do you know that? Because he says even the most wretched people would rather continue their life wretched than die. They cling to life. And even all the animals, they all are afraid to die. They shrink from annihilation. Even the least of worms wiggles intensely to get away. So there's this instinct of love of life. And humans, furthermore, have a love of knowing that they exist, of not being insane. So on page 368, he says, and how much human nature loves the knowledge of its existence and how it shrinks from being deceived will be sufficiently understood from this fact, that every man prefers to grieve in a sane mind rather than to be glad in madness. And this grand and wonderful instinct belongs to men alone of all animals, for though some of them have keener eyesight than ourselves for this world's light, they cannot attain to that spiritual light with which our mind is somehow irradiated, so that we can form right judgments of all things. For our power to judge is proportioned to our acceptance of this light. So this supreme light, this is the light of God's mind, which includes all of these absolute ideas. So over on the right-hand column on page 368, he says, for we have another and far superior sense. So animals have superior eyesight, superior hearing, superior sense of smell, but humans have another and far superior sense belonging to the inner man, by which we perceive what things are just and what unjust, just by means of an intelligible idea, unjust by the want of it. This sense is aided in its functions neither by the eyesight, nor by the orifice of the ear, nor by the air holes of the nostril, nor by the palate's taste, nor by any bodily touch. By it I am assured both that I am, and that I know this, and these 2 I love. And in this same manner I am assured that I love them. All right, so how do you recognize the image of God in ourselves, according to Augustine? By this 6th sense that humans have to perceive the absolute ideas of things such as justice, these intelligible ideas. Now that is this idea of the light, the light of another world, the spiritual light that gives us knowledge, that we saw in Plato's Phaedo. And where are these absolute ideas? Specifically at the horizon of the cosmos, we saw in the Pheadrus. So on page 252 and 253, Socrates in the Phaedo, when he's awaiting the hemlock that's going to send him to the next world, here's what he says. He says on the right-hand column near the bottom, and he attains to the knowledge of them these absolute ideas, like the absolute good and the absolute justice, absolute beauty. He attains to the knowledge of them in their highest purity, who goes to each of them with the mind alone. He doesn't allow, when in the act of thought, the intrusion or introduction of sight or any other sense in the company of reason, but with the very light of the mind in her clearness, he penetrates into the very light of truth. And then on the other side of page 253, when you die and your soul is alone by itself, when God is pleased to release you from your body, and then the foolishness of the body will be cleared away, will be pure and converse with other pure souls, we ourselves will know the clear light everywhere, the light of truth. And where is that light of truth? It's specifically, according to the Pheadrus, out at the outermost sphere of heaven. So on page 257 on the right-hand column, for the immortals, when they are at the end of their course, go forth and stand upon the outside of heaven. The revolution of the spheres carries them around, and they behold the things beyond. So there abides the very being with which true knowledge is concerned, the colorless, formless, intangible essence visible only to the mind, the pilot of the soul. That is where you find all of these universal concepts. The idea of the good is the container for all of the other absolute ideas, and it seems to correspond to the centralmost point of the universe, according to Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus, and the outermost horizon of the cosmos. That's where the ideas of God's mind exist, according to Plato. Now here's the part from the Confessions, from Augustine's Confessions that I'm going to read. And you can see how similar it is to what Plato said in the Pheadrus. So in Confessions, Augustine talks about the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So he says, what do you mean in the beginning? All the other acts of creation have a numbered day. On the first day, on the second day, on the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and then on the seventh day, God rested. But in the beginning, so he's saying this is something God created before time. It's the precursor for the creation of matter and space and time, and he calls it the heaven of heaven. He says, I assume that it is because by heaven is meant heaven of heaven, the intellectual heaven, where it is given to the intellect to know in one act and not part by part, not to know now one thing, now another, but, as has been said, to know in one act without any succession of time. And then he later goes on to say that he created the Logos in the beginning. So God, the Son, is in this outermost horizon of the cosmos, which is called the City of God. It's also called the Mother of God. So Augustine writes clearly, the heaven of heaven, which he made in the beginning, and not on any numbered day, is in some way an intellectual creature, although in no way co-eternal with you, the Trinity, it is yet a partaker in your eternity. So you see there, he's using the same language that he used in the City of God about the image of God in each of us. He says, and we indeed this is page 366, and we indeed recognize in ourselves the image of God, that is of the Supreme Trinity, an image which, though it be not equal to God, or rather, though it be very far removed from him, being neither co-eternal nor consubstantial, it is yet nearer to him in nature than any other of his works. That image of God seems to be what he describes as the City of God in Confessions. And the fact that this article that we're reading from is titled The City of God seems to confirm that. So the image of God is to be beheld specifically at the outermost sphere of the cosmos, where the light of God's mind exists, and the human mind is capable of perceiving these absolute ideas. But in particular, it's the Trinity. I exist, I know that I exist, and I love the fact that I exist and that I know that I exist. But going back here to the Confessions, he's saying that there was then a created wisdom created before all things, the reasonable and intellectual mind of your pure city, our mother, which is above and is free and eternal in heaven. And then he talks about this heaven of heaven, the City of God. With you ever, then he's saying, now he's addressing God the Father, and he says, with you ever indwelling and illuminating it, a pure mind, united in perfect harmony and a binding union of peace with those holy spirits, the citizens of your city, which is in heaven, far above the heavens we see. So that is just to show you this relationship between St. Augustine's philosophy and Plato. I think it's really important to take note of that, that the ideas are specifically out at the outermost horizon of the cosmos. And I focus on that because that claim, as outlandish as it seems more plausible when you take into account Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory, which I've talked about. According to the most cutting-edge theory, or at least one of the most cutting-edge theories in academic physics today, the past, the present, and the future of the entire material three-dimensional universe is located at each point of the outermost horizon, where space-time is expanding away from Earth at the speed of light, and it radiates back in with the cosmic microwave background radiation on these fundamental strings, these elastic, fundamental, one-dimensional, very long strings to create the illusion of the three-dimensional world. And then people like the psychologist Carl Jung, and the Harvard neuroscientist, neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, they both had near-death experiences. They both said they went out to that outermost horizon of the cosmos where they had knowledge of the past, the present, and the future of the interior universe. And Jung even talked about, it seemed to him as if each of us in the three-dimensional universe lives in a little box of illusion tethered to the horizon by a thread. So that has all of the basic elements of Susskind's holographic string theory. And at the end of Plato's Republic, he has a near-death experience of a soldier named who woke up on his own funeral pyre, and he went out to the horizon of the cosmos, and he saw everyone attached by these threads of destiny back from the horizon of the cosmos through the concentric spheres back to the planet Earth. So that just seems like it's not a coincidence. What are the odds that... So this whole part 3 of the book is epistemology. What is knowledge? How can I know? So Plato's theory of ideas says you can have knowledge of all the many material things by relating each back to its absolute idea from which it emanates. You can know all the different trees if you know the idea of tree. And Augustine will say those ideas exist in the mind of God, that he created specifically at the outermost, the heaven of heavens. Outside of the visible sphere of the stars, there's this other sphere which contains the absolute ideas. So that's called rationalism, as opposed to empiricism, which says all knowledge comes from your sense organs only. And then it is imprinted on your mind like on a blank slate, a tabula rasa, which was John Locke's terms. So I think that is enough